The rain fell gently on the quiet street, pattering against the pavement and leaving a faint scent of wet earth in the air. It was early morning and most of the city was still waking up, but the grand mansion at the end of the street was already alive with activity. The household staff was moving briskly, arranging fresh flowers, polishing silver, and preparing for the busy day ahead. The sound of footsteps echoed lightly in the large hallways as the family prepared for another routine of luxury and ease. The front gate opened slowly, creaking on its hinges, and a young woman stepped through. She was dressed plainly, her shoes modest and her coat damp from the rain. Her hair was tied back neatly, and her eyes carried a quiet determination that seemed almost out of place in the extravagant surroundings. She held her small bag close to her chest as she walked up the long stone pathway to the main entrance. She was here for a simple purpose: to work. The butler, a tall man with a stern face and eyes that missed nothing, noticed her immediately. He studied her carefully, his expression unreadable. "Good morning," the young woman said softly, bowing slightly. Her voice was calm, polite, and steady, but it carried a confidence that made him pause for a moment. "I came for the maid position advertised." The butler's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary, as if trying to understand the quiet strength she carried. He nodded and gestured toward the grand hall. "Please follow me," he said, his voice formal but not unkind. She walked behind him, careful to keep her steps soft on the polished floors, aware that every sound seemed amplified in the vast mansion. The hall was filled with the scent of fresh flowers and polished wood. Paintings of ancestors in ornate frames lined the walls, each one staring down as if judging the newcomers. The young woman's eyes briefly met the eyes of the portraits, and she gave a small, respectful nod. She had grown up in a world where respect and manners were not optional, and even here, she could not help but acknowledge the presence of history surrounding her. She was led to a small room where the head of the household staff waited. The woman in charge of hiring was middle-aged, dressed neatly, her hair pulled back in a bun. She studied the young woman from head to toe, her expression neutral. "You understand the duties?" she asked. The young woman nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I am ready to work hard and learn whatever is needed." Her answer was simple, honest, and sincere. She did not boast about skills or experience. She simply stated her readiness to serve. There was something refreshing about her honesty, something that made the woman pause and reconsider her initial judgment. "Very well," the woman said finally, giving a small nod. "You will start today. There is much to do." She handed the young woman a small key and a list of tasks. "Follow the instructions carefully and remember, attention to detail is important here." The young woman accepted the key and list without a word of complaint. She thanked the woman politely and left the room, her mind already organizing the work ahead. She moved through the mansion with quiet efficiency, observing the rhythm of the household, the movements of the staff, and the habits of the family. She was careful to blend in, to be present but unnoticed, aware that her role was to serve without drawing attention. Her first task was to clean the library, a room filled with tall shelves, heavy books, and the faint scent of old paper. She moved carefully, dusting each shelf, arranging books neatly and making sure that every detail was perfect. As she worked, she listened to the faint sounds of the household, the clinking of dishes, the soft chatter of children, the distant laughter of guests arriving for a morning tea. She was alert, observing everything, learning the pace and rhythm of this new world she had entered. By mid-morning, she had completed several tasks. She polished the silver in the dining room, organized the pantry, and even helped the children with their schoolwork when they wandered into the hall looking for someone to guide them. The young woman spoke gently, patiently explaining lessons they struggled with, all while keeping her demeanor humble. She did not seek praise or recognition. She simply did her work quietly and well. It was during these small interactions that the household began to notice something unusual about her. She carried herself with a grace that seemed almost natural, a poise that did not come from training as a maid but from something deeper. She spoke softly but clearly, with a knowledge of manners and etiquette that surprised the staff and even some of the children. They began to whisper quietly among themselves, wondering who this young woman really was, yet she gave no hint of pride or arrogance. She laughed softly when the children made mistakes, helped the staff without complaint, and never drew attention to her own talents. It was this combination of skill and humility that made her presence remarkable. People began to feel that there was something extraordinary hidden behind her quiet exterior, but no one could put their finger on what it was. Lunch was a simple affair, with the household staff eating quietly in the kitchen. The young woman served food, making sure everything was in order, and then joined them briefly to rest. She did not complain about the work, though her hands were already worn from cleaning, dusting, and arranging. She smiled kindly at her fellow staff members, offering gentle words of encouragement when someone struggled with a task. Her warmth was subtle but genuine, and slowly the staff began to accept her not just as a colleague, but as someone who inspired them through example. After lunch, the family returned from their errands. The young woman continued her duties, observing and learning, moving quietly through the mansion like a shadow that left a subtle impact wherever it went. The children followed her at times, curious about her knowledge and manners. They asked questions and she answered patiently, never condescending, always encouraging. Even the head of the household staff found herself studying this new maid, wondering about the intelligence and refinement that seemed so natural, yet unusual for someone in such a humble position. By evening, the mansion was calm again. Guests had left, the children were upstairs, and the family gathered in the drawing room. The young woman finished her last tasks for the day, making sure every detail was perfect. She took a moment to look around the rooms she had cared for, the polished surfaces, the neatly arranged items, and felt a quiet satisfaction. It was not pride, not in the sense of wanting recognition, but a simple acknowledgement that her work had been done well, and that the space was ready for the family to enjoy. As she prepared to leave for the night, the butler approached her again. His expression was still formal, but there was a hint of curiosity now, a recognition of something unusual in her demeanor. "You work efficiently," he said simply. The young woman nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "I try to do my best," she replied softly. The butler studied her for a long moment, as if trying to understand the quiet strength she carried. Then he nodded once, turning back toward the main hall. It was a small acknowledgement, but for her it was enough. She did not need praise or admiration. She only needed to do her work well, to remain true to herself, and to observe the world she had quietly entered. That night, she returned to her modest room in the servants' quarters. It was simple, with a small bed, a wooden chest, and a window overlooking the garden. She placed her bag carefully beside the bed and sat for a moment, reflecting on her first day. The mansion was grand, the family wealthy, and the staff experienced, yet she felt no fear, no desire to compete or stand out. She had entered this world quietly, with only the intention to work and learn, and already she could sense that her presence had begun to stir curiosity. As she lay down to rest, the sound of the rain continued outside, soft and steady. It was a peaceful night, yet one filled with the quiet promise of the days to come. She did not know how the family or staff would truly respond to her over time, nor did she wish to anticipate it. She only knew that she had taken the first step, that she had entered a world of wealth and privilege with humility, and that she carried within her the strength to navigate it on her own terms. Somewhere in the grand mansion, portraits of ancestors stared down, silent witnesses to the unfolding story, and in the quiet, a new presence had entered, modest and unassuming, yet carrying within her a depth that no one had yet begun to understand. The young woman slept that night, unaware of how much her simple arrival would change the rhythm of this household, and unaware that the quiet curiosity she inspired was only the beginning of a story that would soon leave everyone speechless. The next morning, the young woman woke before the sun, as she had done every day since she could remember. She moved quietly through her small room, careful not to wake the other servants who still slept. The mansion was peaceful in the early hours, the only sounds the faint creak of doors and the distant chirping of birds in the garden. She dressed simply, tying her hair back with care, and prepared herself for another day. Today, like every day, she would work, observe, and remain unnoticed, yet she could already feel the subtle changes her presence had begun to stir. As she entered the main hall, she noticed the staff gathered, speaking in hushed tones. The cook waved at her, smiling faintly. "You handled the library beautifully yesterday," she said. Even the master noticed. The young woman nodded politely, her lips barely curving into a small, modest smile. She thanked the cook softly, though she did not wish to be praised. Praise had never been the goal. Doing her work well had always been enough. Her first task that day was in the music room. The family had a piano, large and polished, and it was often left unused for long stretches. She approached it quietly, dusting the surface and adjusting the stool. When the children came down later, they found her seated and playing a simple tune, her fingers moving with surprising grace. She looked up briefly and smiled at them. "Would you like to try?" she asked softly. The children nodded eagerly, and she guided their small hands on the keys, correcting their posture and showing them the rhythm. She did not scold or raise her voice, but her quiet confidence and gentle patience made them eager to learn. A maid teaching piano was unusual, and the children could not stop whispering about how skilled she seemed. They had seen other servants in the house before, but none had ever carried themselves with such poise or offered instruction without pride. By mid-morning, the young woman had completed several chores around the mansion. She polished the silver in the dining room with care, arranged fresh flowers in every vase, and even noticed a broken vase that had been overlooked for days. She carefully placed it aside, making a mental note to report it to the head of the staff. Her eyes missed nothing, and her hands moved with practiced precision. The staff watched her silently, noticing the ease with which she completed tasks that often took others hours to finish. When the family returned for breakfast, they found everything in perfect order. The table was neatly set, the flowers were arranged just so, and the air carried a faint but pleasant scent of cleanliness. The father of the family, a man usually busy with business and distant from the household's inner workings, glanced around. Something about the smooth organization of the rooms and the quiet efficiency of the staff struck him. He frowned slightly, as if trying to understand what had changed. Meanwhile, the children continued to follow the young woman wherever she went. They were curious about her mannerisms, the way she spoke politely to everyone, and the way she seemed to notice things others missed. One of the children tugged at her sleeve. "Where did you learn all this?" he asked innocently. She paused and smiled softly. "I have learned many things along the way," she said. "Sometimes you learn from teachers, and sometimes you learn by paying attention." Her words were simple, yet they carried a wisdom that made the child stop and think. He had never heard such an answer from a servant before. The staff began to notice small details that were unusual for someone in her position. She could converse politely with the guests who visited the house, answering questions about art, music, and literature with ease. She knew how to serve tea in a way that impressed even the most particular visitors. She corrected minor mistakes in the household accounts without seeming to boast, and her knowledge of etiquette was remarkable. Slowly, a sense of curiosity grew among the household staff and even the family members. Who was this young woman, really? One afternoon, a guest arrived unexpectedly, an elderly woman from a neighboring estate. She carried herself with elegance and spoke with authority, yet her sharp eyes seemed to miss nothing. When she entered the drawing room, she noticed the young woman arranging the flowers. She paused, watching silently, her lips pressed together. The young woman looked up and greeted her politely. "Good afternoon, ma'am," she said softly, curtsying slightly. The guest's eyes widened ever so slightly. She glanced at the young woman again, then at the family, as if trying to piece together something she already suspected. Throughout the afternoon, the young woman assisted with serving refreshments, pouring tea with precision, and arranging the seating with quiet skill. The guest's gaze followed her every movement, her curiosity clearly piqued. By the time the visit ended, there were whispers behind closed doors. Questions about how someone so young and so unassuming could possess such refinement. Even the head of the household staff found herself unsettled. She had seen many maids come and go, some skilled, some lazy, some ambitious, but none had ever combined humility, skill, and grace in this way. She watched the young woman from a distance, noting the subtle gestures, the careful attention to detail, the way she moved as if every action mattered. There was an elegance that could not be taught, a quiet intelligence that seemed innate. She could not stop herself from wondering about the young woman's past. Despite the growing curiosity, the young woman did not seek recognition. She continued her work with the same quiet determination, helping where needed, observing and learning. She knew that attention would come eventually, whether she wanted it or not, but for now she focused on the tasks at hand. She cleaned, arranged, and guided the children, always careful to remain respectful and modest. One evening, as the family sat down for dinner, an unexpected conversation began. The father, curious about the maid who had quietly improved the household, asked a question to the eldest child. "Who is this young woman who helps you with your lessons?" he asked. "She is different," the child replied, looking thoughtful. "She knows so much and helps us without ever saying she is better than us. She is kind, but she seems like she has something special." The mother raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Something special? What do you mean?" The child shrugged. "I don't know. She just knows things, and she does things better than anyone else here, but she never brags." The parents exchanged glances. They were wealthy and accustomed to meeting people who were clever, talented, or ambitious. Yet there was a subtle distinction here that made them pause. The young woman was accomplishing remarkable things quietly, without drawing attention to herself. Her humility combined with her competence made her presence quietly extraordinary. That night, after the household had settled, the young woman returned to her room. She was tired, yes, but not discouraged. She reflected on the day's events, thinking about the children she had taught, the guests she had served, and the staff she had helped. She did not seek reward or recognition, yet she could not ignore the curiosity her presence had begun to inspire. Something within her knew that this was only the beginning, that the quiet path she had chosen might soon lead to unexpected discoveries. She thought about the guests who had noticed her skills, the children who looked at her with admiration, and even the staff who whispered questions about her background. She smiled softly, a small, private smile that carried no pride, only the calm satisfaction of someone who had done her work well. She did not need anyone else to understand her, yet she knew that soon people would begin to notice more than just her work. As the night deepened, the mansion fell silent. The staff slept, the family rested, and the rain continued to fall softly outside. The young woman lay in her modest bed, thinking about the day, about the subtle ways her presence had affected those around her. She had entered this world quietly, blending in, observing, and serving, yet already she could feel a shift. Curiosity had been sparked and whispers had begun. In the quiet darkness, she allowed herself a moment of thought about who she really was, though she did not reveal it to anyone. Her past, her skills, and her experiences were hers alone, carefully hidden beneath the simple exterior of a humble maid. She had chosen this path for reasons only she understood, and she was determined to follow it with patience and grace. By the time she drifted to sleep, the household had unknowingly been touched by someone extraordinary. The staff and family, unaware of her full story, had begun to notice subtle differences, an unusual confidence, a quiet intelligence, and a humility that stood out among the many who passed through their doors. The young woman had entered their world as a maid, unnoticed by most, yet already she had left impressions that could not be erased, and in the silence of the night, one truth remained clear: she was not just a maid. She was someone with a story that had yet to be revealed, someone whose presence carried a quiet power that would soon leave everyone speechless. But for now, she remained as she had chosen, to work, to observe, and to blend into the rhythm of the mansion, all while hiding the extraordinary person she truly was beneath the unassuming exterior. The days passed quickly, yet the mansion seemed to hold its breath whenever the young woman moved through its halls. The staff continued to whisper quietly about her abilities, and even the family could no longer ignore the unusual presence she carried. She was always in the background, performing her duties with quiet perfection, yet the subtle way she seemed to improve everything around her made her impossible to forget. It began with small incidents. One morning, the family noticed that the silverware was not just polished, but arranged in a way that made serving dinner smoother and more elegant than usual. The napkins were folded in perfect symmetry, and the flowers in the dining room had been placed just so, adding warmth and color to the room. The father, who rarely commented on household matters, paused as he sipped his morning coffee. "Everything feels different," he muttered, almost to himself. Even the children, who were usually careless with their lessons, began to pay closer attention. The young woman had a way of guiding them without making them feel scolded or pressured. Her questions were gentle, yet they challenged the children to think. She praised their effort, not just their results, and in response they began to show a new level of focus. The parents began to notice, impressed but puzzled. How could a maid, someone from outside their world of privilege, influence their children so profoundly? Rumors among the staff started to grow louder, though always whispered. She must have come from a very refined background, one maid said quietly to another as they worked in the kitchen. "No one learns to do everything this well without some kind of special training." "I know," the other replied. "And yet she behaves like she is nothing. She doesn't even brag about it." The young woman overheard snippets of these conversations but did not respond. She knew that curiosity was natural, but she had chosen this path for a reason. Revealing herself too soon would change everything, and she was not yet ready for that. Instead, she focused on her work, on the rhythm of the mansion, and on maintaining the quiet dignity she had cultivated for years. One afternoon, a small crisis arose in the household. The family had prepared for a formal tea with several influential guests, and everything seemed in order, until a large tray of pastries slipped and fell, scattering across the floor just moments before the guests arrived. The staff froze, panic spreading like wildfire. The children stared wide-eyed, unsure what to do. The young woman stepped forward without hesitation. She directed the staff calmly, instructing them where to place new trays, how to clean the mess efficiently, and how to arrange the table once again. Her voice was soft but carried authority, and the staff obeyed without question. Within minutes, the room was restored, polished, and ready. The guests arrived to find everything perfect, unaware of the chaos that had occurred moments before. The father of the family watched from the doorway, astonished. He had expected mistakes, confusion, and stress, but instead, he saw a young maid handle the situation with poise and skill far beyond anyone he had ever employed. He could not hide his surprise, and though he remained silent at the moment, he began to wonder about the true background of this mysterious young woman. The guests complimented the arrangement and the smooth service, praising the family for hosting such a well-organized event. The young woman remained in the background, smiling politely, taking no credit, yet the subtle efficiency of her actions had left an impression on everyone. Even the head of the staff, who had grown accustomed to handling emergencies herself, could not help but feel a quiet admiration. Yet not everyone reacted with admiration. Some staff members began to feel uneasy. They whispered behind closed doors, questioning why a young maid seemed to have knowledge and skills that they had spent years acquiring. "Who is she really?" one of the senior maids asked nervously. "She knows more than any of us, yet she acts like she is nothing." The tension began to grow subtly within the household. The young woman noticed the whispers but continued her work with the same quiet diligence. She understood human nature. People often feared what they could not explain, and her humility combined with talent was unsettling to those who felt insecure. She did not confront them or attempt to justify herself. She simply carried on, letting her actions speak quietly for her. One evening, the family received an important visitor, a distant relative known for their sharp wit and keen observation. The relative entered the mansion with a sense of curiosity, scanning the rooms, noting the attention to detail, and commenting on the elegance of the household. The young woman served tea with grace, moving quietly yet efficiently, her hands steady, her posture impeccable. The relative's eyes widened ever so slightly as they observed her. There was something about the way she carried herself, the way she managed multiple tasks effortlessly, and the quiet authority in her presence that defied the expectations of a maid. They whispered something to the father, who looked thoughtful and slightly concerned. The young woman noticed nothing, yet she could feel the subtle shift in the energy of the room. Curiosity had turned into suspicion, and suspicion was often the first step toward discovery. The family began to ask questions quietly among themselves. "How does she know so much?" the mother asked softly. "She is polite, kind, and helpful, yet there is something about her that does not belong to the ordinary world of servants." The father nodded. "It is unusual, certainly, but perhaps it is better to let her be. She has improved the household more than anyone else could have. That is enough for now." The young woman overheard none of these words, yet she sensed the subtle attention directed toward her. She had entered the household with the intention of remaining unnoticed, but her skills and quiet confidence made it impossible to remain entirely invisible. She had to balance her humility with her competence, ensuring that she did not attract too much attention, yet continuing to perform her duties with excellence. The tension reached its peak one morning, when the family planned a small gathering for business associates. The young woman was tasked with preparing the drawing room, arranging refreshments, and assisting with minor details of the event. She worked methodically, her movements smooth and precise, Yet she noticed a few staff members whispering among themselves, casting curious glances her way. As the gathering began, a minor mishap occurred. One of the candles tipped over on the dining table, threatening to spill wax onto the fine linen. The staff froze, unsure what to do. The young woman stepped forward calmly, adjusting the candle, preventing the wax from causing damage, and quietly alerting the staff to be cautious. The guests noticed nothing, but the father's eyes were fixed on her, admiration mixed with disbelief. Later that evening, after the guests had left, the family gathered in the drawing room. The father spoke quietly to the mother. She handled the situation today as if she has done this her whole life. Yet she is a maid. How is that possible? The mother shook her head. I do not know. She is extraordinary, but she does not wish to be noticed. I have never seen anything like it. Even the children began to whisper among themselves. She is not like anyone we have ever met, one of them said. She knows everything and yet acts like she knows nothing. The young woman in her modest room later that night reflected on the events of the day. She knew that her presence had begun to stir unease and curiosity, yet she also knew that patience was required. The world would notice her eventually, but revealing herself too soon could disrupt the delicate balance she had maintained. She focused on her work, her humility, and her quiet determination, knowing that the true test of character was not in recognition, but in consistency and grace. She recalled the whispers, the subtle glances, the growing curiosity of the staff and family. She did not fear their questions, nor did she resent them. She understood that human beings often reacted to talent and grace with suspicion, especially when it appeared where they least expected it. Her choice had been deliberate, to enter their world quietly, to serve and to observe, letting her true self remain hidden until the right moment. Days turned into weeks, and the young woman's influence within the mansion grew quietly. She guided the children's lessons, assisted the staff in improving efficiency, and helped the family maintain a sense of order and elegance that was previously lacking. Yet with each act of kindness and skill, the curiosity about her grew stronger. Some staff members admired her silently, some were unsettled, and a few began to question what she had left behind before entering this household. One afternoon, the eldest child asked her a question that had been on their mind for some time. "Why are you so different?" they asked. "You are kind, smart, and graceful. No one else is like that." The young woman paused, considering her words carefully. She smiled softly and said, "I have learned many things in life. Some I have been taught and some I have learned by watching and paying attention. But being kind and careful is something anyone can choose to do." The child nodded, though they did not fully understand. Still, the answer seemed enough for now. The young woman had not revealed her past, her talents, or the extraordinary life she had once lived. Yet she had planted a seed of curiosity that would continue to grow, unnoticed by most, yet undeniable to those who paid attention. By evening, the household had begun to settle into a new rhythm. The family and staff had grown accustomed to her presence, yet there was an undercurrent of wonder and quiet speculation that could not be ignored. The young woman had entered their world as a maid, unnoticed by most, yet she had already begun to change the dynamics of the household in subtle, powerful ways. As she prepared for bed that night, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. She knew that the coming days would bring new challenges, perhaps suspicion, and maybe even confrontation. Yet she also knew that her purpose was not to impress or to seek recognition, but to maintain her path with dignity, humility, and grace. She had chosen to step into a world that was not hers by birth, and she intended to navigate it carefully, quietly, and wisely. Outside, the mansion was silent under the soft glow of the moon. The staff slept, the family rested, and the young woman's presence lingered like a quiet promise of things yet to be revealed. She had sparked curiosity, admiration, and even suspicion, but her secret remained intact. The story of who she truly was had not yet been told, and she was determined that it would be revealed on her own terms. And so the mansion slept, unaware that the quiet maid moving among its halls carried a depth of skill, intelligence, and experience that no one had yet begun to understand. The tension, the curiosity, and the wonder would continue to grow, setting the stage for the day when her true identity would finally leave everyone speechless. The mansion felt different that morning. There was a subtle tension in the air, though no one could quite say why. The staff moved efficiently, carrying out their duties, but their eyes occasionally flicked toward the young woman, the maid whose presence had quietly begun to unsettle the household. Even the family noticed it. There was something in her calm, collected way of moving, the way she anticipated needs before they were spoken, that made people stop and watch without realizing it. The day began with routine tasks, yet the young woman treated each chore with the same care as always. She tidied the library, arranged the drawing room, and polished silver with steady hands. But today, there was an added weight in her steps, a sense that something unexpected was about to happen. She could feel it, a tension in the rhythm of the household that hinted at change. Late in the morning, the eldest child came running to her. "Aunt Margaret is coming today," the child said breathlessly. "She is very important, and she said she wants to see everything prepared perfectly." The young woman nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Aunt Margaret was known as a discerning guest, a woman whose judgment could influence the family's reputation. Her visits were rare and always carried significance. The young woman moved calmly but with purpose, checking each room, adjusting details that no one else might notice. She arranged the flowers, polished the silver once more, and ensured that every item was in its place. When the family arrived to greet Aunt Margaret, the mansion appeared flawless. The dining room glowed with polished surfaces and neatly arranged furniture, and the scent of fresh flowers filled the air. Guests were ushered in smoothly, refreshments served promptly, and the atmosphere carried an air of quiet elegance. The young woman moved in the background, attending to her duties with precise movements. Yet her presence did not go unnoticed. Aunt Margaret entered the room, her eyes scanning the surroundings with sharp attention. She paused, noticing the subtle elegance in the arrangement of the furniture, the perfect placement of flowers, and the smooth operation of the household staff. Her gaze lingered on the young woman, who was quietly placing a tray of tea in front of the guests. Something about the maid's posture, her poise, and the careful efficiency of her actions struck Aunt Margaret immediately. "You have done a remarkable job," Aunt Margaret said softly to the young woman. Her tone was polite but carried the weight of genuine surprise. The young woman's heart did not race. She remained composed, offering only a humble smile. "Thank you, ma'am," she replied quietly. "I only try to do my best." Even the head of the household staff noticed the exchange, feeling a mixture of pride and unease. The young woman had managed to impress a guest whose standards were known to be exacting, and she had done it without a hint of showiness or pride. It was remarkable, yet it also raised questions. How could someone so young, so seemingly ordinary, perform at a level that many trained staff struggled to achieve? The afternoon brought a minor crisis. A decorative vase, fragile and expensive, was accidentally knocked over by one of the younger staff members. It teetered dangerously on the edge of a table before falling. Gasps echoed through the room. The staff froze, unsure what to do, fearing the reaction of the guest. The young woman acted immediately. With quick but graceful movements, she steadied the vase just before it could fall, preventing disaster. She calmly guided the staff to handle the situation, ensuring that nothing else was disturbed. The guests noticed nothing of the near mishap, but the family watched with astonishment. The young woman's confidence, quick thinking, and elegance in handling the situation left them speechless. Later, as tea was served and conversations continued, Aunt Margaret leaned closer to the father of the household. "Who is that maid?" she whispered. "She is extraordinary. I have never seen such poise and competence from someone in her position." The father shook his head, equally impressed and puzzled. "I do not know. She has only been here a short time, yet she seems to anticipate every need and handle every situation flawlessly." Aunt Margaret's gaze returned to the young woman, her curiosity intensifying. "There is more to her than meets the eye. I can feel it. Her presence is commanding yet subtle. I would like to know her story." The young woman, meanwhile, continued her work without acknowledging the attention she had drawn. She moved quietly, smiling politely when addressed, arranging cups and plates with care and guiding the children through a small game to keep them entertained. She remained composed, never seeking recognition, though her actions had begun to make waves among the staff and family alike. By evening, the household had settled, yet the atmosphere was charged with curiosity. Staff whispered in small groups, speculating about her background, sharing stories of small moments where she had quietly corrected mistakes, guided the children, or managed difficult situations with elegance. Even the family began to ask questions in private, their fascination with her growing by the day. The eldest child, unable to contain curiosity any longer, approached her quietly in the garden. "Why do you know so much?" the child asked. "You can do everything perfectly, and you teach us things no one else does." "Who are you really?" The young woman smiled gently, kneeling to meet the child at eye level. "I have learned many things," she said softly. "Some from teachers, some from books, and some from life itself. But who I am is not as important as what I do now. I am here to help and to learn just like everyone else." The child nodded thoughtfully, sensing that there was truth in her words, but also understanding that there were secrets the young woman had chosen to keep. That evening, the young woman returned to her small room, reflecting on the day's events. She could sense that the curiosity and subtle tension within the household were growing. People were beginning to notice her more, and whispers of her talents were becoming more widespread. She knew that the balance she had maintained for weeks was beginning to shift. Her skills, once unnoticed and quietly admired, were now drawing attention that could not be ignored. She understood that the day would come when she might have to confront questions about her past, her education, and the life she had lived before entering this household. Yet she did not feel fear. She had chosen this path deliberately, knowing that patience and humility were her greatest allies. Her true identity was a story for another time, one that would reveal itself when the moment was right. For now, she focused on her work, on maintaining grace, and on navigating the growing curiosity of those around her with care and intelligence. The following days brought new challenges. A visiting merchant arrived unexpectedly, carrying documents and parcels that needed careful attention. The staff were unsure how to handle the situation, worried about mistakes or delays. The young woman stepped in quietly, organizing the parcels, checking the documents, and ensuring that everything was handled efficiently. The merchant looked on with astonishment, commenting quietly to the father of the household about the young woman's remarkable skills. "She is not just a maid," he said softly. "She has knowledge and composure far beyond what I would expect." "Where could she have learned such things?" The father, still puzzled, simply nodded. He had begun to accept that the young woman was extraordinary, though he had no answers for how or why. The young woman herself remained calm, continuing her work as though nothing unusual had happened. But the family could no longer ignore her presence. One evening, during a quiet moment in the garden, the young woman allowed herself a brief reflection. The mansion, with all its grandeur and history, had become a stage for subtle revelations. She had entered quietly, worked diligently, and begun to stir curiosity, admiration, and even suspicion among those around her. The realization was not unsettling. Rather, it was confirmation that her careful approach had begun to take effect. She thought of the coming days, aware that the moment for a true revelation might be near. Her skills, patience, and humility had earned attention, but the final understanding of who she really was had not yet been reached. She felt a quiet sense of readiness, knowing that when the time came, she would handle it with the same grace she applied to every task, every interaction, and every challenge. That night, the mansion was quiet once more. The family rested, the staff slept, and the young woman's presence lingered like a gentle, invisible force. The day had been filled with small crises, subtle admiration, and growing curiosity, all of which had served to highlight the quiet power she carried within. She did not boast, did not seek recognition, yet she had left an indelible impression on everyone she encountered. And in that silence, a truth remained clear. The moment of revelation was approaching. The young woman had planted seeds of admiration, intrigue, and respect, and soon, the story of who she truly was would be revealed. Until then, she would continue her work, her humility intact, her skills polished, and her patience unwavering. She had entered the world as a maid, but she carried within her the quiet strength of someone destined to leave everyone speechless. The morning began like any other, quiet and calm, with soft sunlight filtering through the tall windows of the mansion. The young woman moved through the halls with her usual grace, attending to her chores, arranging flowers, and checking every room with the care she had shown since her first day. Yet today there was a different energy in the air. The staff whispered quietly among themselves, and even the family seemed more alert than usual. Something was about to happen, though no one could yet say what. It started with a letter. The butler entered the kitchen where the young woman was polishing silver and handed her a neatly folded envelope. There was no name written on it, only the seal of a distant organization known for recognizing people of extraordinary talent. The young woman's hands remained steady as she broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Her eyes skimmed the words quickly, her face calm, revealing nothing of the excitement she felt inside. The letter contained an invitation, a recognition of her past achievements, her skills and her true identity, something she had kept hidden from everyone in the mansion. It was a moment she had anticipated in her heart, but now it had arrived. She folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her small bag, and continued her work, pretending to be absorbed in routine tasks. Yet beneath her calm exterior, a quiet thrill ran through her. Today would be the day the world around her would finally understand who she really was. The family had gathered in the drawing room for breakfast. The young woman entered, serving tea and toast, her movements smooth and precise. The father noticed something in her eyes, a calm confidence that seemed different from before. He watched her closely, curious, sensing that she had something important to share. Finally, she spoke, her voice gentle but clear. "There is something I would like to share with all of you," she said. The room fell silent. The staff stopped mid-task, and even the children froze, sensing the gravity in her tone. The family turned their attention fully to her, waiting. "I have worked here as your maid for some time, performing the tasks you have entrusted to me," she began. "But there is more to my story than what you have seen." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. The room was quiet, the air heavy with anticipation. The staff exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what was coming. The children leaned forward, their eyes wide with curiosity. Even the father and mother of the household felt a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. The young woman continued, "I come from a background that you could not have imagined. I have been trained, educated, and experienced in ways that have allowed me to acquire the skills and knowledge you have seen. My time here was not about hiding my abilities, but about choosing when and how to reveal them." A hush fell over the room. The revelation hung in the air, impossible to ignore. Staff whispered softly, trying to comprehend what she had just said. The children's eyes widened further, struggling to understand how the maid they had grown to admire could have a life so different from their own. The young woman took a deep breath and smiled gently. "I have chosen to serve here not for recognition, but because I wished to learn, observe, and contribute in a way that mattered. The lessons I have shared with your children, the order I have brought to your home, and the small ways I have assisted were not meant to impress, but to help." The father spoke first, his voice calm but filled with awe. "You have been extraordinary," he said. "We have suspected for some time that there was more to you than we realized, but we never imagined this. All along, we have been living with someone whose talent, wisdom, and grace surpasses everything we could have expected." The mother nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "You have taught us, guided us, and cared for us without asking for anything in return. To think that all this time you carried such a story with you. It leaves me speechless." The young woman shook her head gently. "It was never about recognition. My goal has always been to do what I could, quietly and well. But I wanted you to know the truth now that the time is right." The children ran to her, hugging her with excitement and awe. "We knew you were special," they exclaimed. "We just didn't know how special." The young woman laughed softly, her heart warmed by their innocence and genuine admiration. She patted their heads and smiled. "Thank you," she said. "It means a great deal to me that you believe in what I have done, even without knowing my full story." The staff members, still in mild shock, began to step forward, offering quiet congratulations. Some knelt briefly, showing respect for the life she had led and the work she had done. Others looked on with amazement, realizing that the quiet maid they had admired, envied, and even questioned was someone truly remarkable. The family invited her to sit with them, and she did so modestly, yet with an air of dignity that commanded respect without demanding it. She told them more of her past, of the experiences that had shaped her, and the choices that had led her to this household. She spoke humbly, never exaggerating, but every word revealed the depth of her knowledge, her intelligence, and her extraordinary life. The father leaned back, shaking his head in disbelief. "It is astonishing," he said. We have been living with someone whose wisdom and abilities surpass anyone we have known, and we never realized it. All this time you were among us quietly, helping, guiding, and improving everything without a word of pride. The mother's eyes sparkled with admiration. You have shown us the true meaning of humility and strength. You could have demanded recognition, wealth, or influence, yet you chose to serve and to contribute quietly. That is rare, and it is beautiful. Even the eldest child spoke, a serious look on their face. I will never forget this, the child said. I will remember that true strength is not about showing off, but about helping others, being kind, and knowing when to reveal your gifts. The young woman smiled, touched by their words. That is all I could ever hope for, she said. To leave behind something that matters, to make a difference, and to help in ways that are meaningful. The staff, now fully aware of her true identity, began to treat her with a mixture of respect and admiration they had never shown before. Some whispered quietly about the lessons they had learned from her, the efficiency she had introduced to the household, and the calm authority she had displayed in moments of crisis. She had transformed their understanding of what it meant to be capable, humble, and remarkable. As the day progressed, word of her identity reached other households, friends, and acquaintances who had connections to the family. The news spread quietly at first, then more broadly, leaving many astonished. How could someone so unassuming, someone who had appeared ordinary, have lived a life so extraordinary? Yet those who had witnessed her daily work understood that her humility had always been genuine. She had never sought admiration, yet it had come to her inevitably, because excellence and kindness cannot remain hidden forever. The young woman continued her work that day, but the atmosphere in the mansion had changed. She was no longer just a maid. She was someone whose presence carried inspiration, admiration, and respect. Yet she remained humble, attending to chores, guiding the children, and helping the staff, showing that her greatness was not in claiming titles or recognition, but in the quiet, consistent application of her talents. Evening fell, and the family gathered in the drawing room, the young woman sitting among them comfortably, a small smile on her face. The father spoke, his voice filled with both pride and wonder. We have learned more from you than we could ever have imagined. You have shown us the meaning of patience, humility, and skill, and you have done it quietly, without asking for anything in return. The mother added, and yet, knowing your story now, we are left speechless at the courage, dedication, and wisdom you carry. You have changed our home, our understanding, and our hearts. The young woman's eyes softened. It has always been my choice to act quietly, but I am grateful that you now understand the reasons behind my actions. My life, my skills, and my experiences were meant to guide me to the right place at the right time. And here, among you, I have found a space where I could contribute, learn, and make a difference. The children, now fully in awe, hugged her again. You are the best, they exclaimed. We will never forget you. The young woman laughed, a sound that was gentle and warm and ruffled their hair. And I will never forget any of you, she said. You have taught me much as well, and you have welcomed me into this home as more than just a maid. For that I am thankful. The staff members, once uncertain and whispering in doubt, now felt pride and admiration. They had worked alongside someone extraordinary, someone whose life and experience far exceeded what they had imagined, yet who had chosen to live simply, serve quietly, and guide others without pride. That night, as the mansion settled into a quiet calm, the young woman prepared for bed. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from a life of hidden talent and experience, to choosing humility and service, to finally revealing her true self. She felt no need for praise or recognition. The understanding, respect, and admiration of those around her were reward enough. She closed her eyes knowing that she had achieved something rare. She had not only performed her duties with excellence but had also inspired everyone around her, taught valuable lessons, and left a mark that would not be forgotten. The mansion, once filled with curiosity and subtle tension, now carried a quiet respect for the woman who had entered as a maid and revealed herself to be someone truly remarkable. In the silence of the night, she allowed herself a small, contented smile. The story of her life, once hidden, had now been shared. The world around her, the family, the children, and the staff, all had witnessed the strength, wisdom, and humility she had carried quietly for so long. And in doing so, she had left everyone speechless, not just because of her identity, but because of the grace, courage, and kindness with which she had lived every moment.